Hello. Oh my goodness.
Hello.
It's been a minute. Look at this. Oh, there's Lisa. Hi, Lisa. And we have
Welcome
Art
back.
here and Glenn. Welcome back, everybody.
Hi, Art. Hi, Glenn. Hi,
Wow.
Harriet. So nice to see you. Hello.
So nice that people are returning.
Yeah. I hope everyone missed us. We missed all of you.
I missed you, Jacqueline.
Hi, Glenn. Missed you also.
How are you?
Good. Hanging in there. Let's see, who else do we have? It looks like Boris is connecting to audio.
Lisa.
Well,
Glenn.
Sorry.
It's all right. We'll go ahead and get started in a few minutes. We do have a good amount of RSVPs tonight, so I just want to give everyone a couple minutes to get here.
Welcome, folks.
Audio
We've got a lot to talk about. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you. You're competing with your music.
Yeah, well, that's the Mooche. Duke Ellington wrote that in 1928, I think it was. And it was nice of him to name a song after me, don't you think? Anyway, you can hear me now better?
Yes.
Say yes, okay.
I thought
Welcome,
Minnie the
folks.
for you.
It's not Minnie the Moocher, it is The Mooch by Duke Ellington. Welcome to Mondays with Mooch, folks. We thought maybe we should come back and re-up these programs, but, maybe in a different way this time. You may remember way back in the before times, we had actual live events all the time, usually like a summer crammed with cafe nights and outdoor park concerts, summer music camp for kids, and then the annual Sinatra birthday bash. Do you remember that? Student showcase concerts, talking jazz events, all kinds of activity. So, of course, there was the barbecue bash for those of you who came to those. That was fun. All I want to say right now, I don't know whose brainstorm this was to have me as the guest for this time, but let's turn it into Ask Mooche Anything. And all I want to say is if you got the email blast and you registered for this, I just want to say, yes, it's an old picture. So, it's not as old as this. That's a pretty old picture. Or this, that doofy guy playing trumpet in high school, that's me. Next to my high school girlfriend, as a matter of fact. Growing up on some sailing trip, I think that was. In a studio somewhere. And we don't want to talk about that too much. Starting to do some rehearsing. I had a stint with this guy for a long time, and it brought us into the Count Basie Theater with the Red Bank Jazz Orchestra on one of those events. I'm not sure remember what that was. But guys, all I can say is let's talk and chat and share some good experiences and some good ideas and some good music, and carry this thing on a little further. So I just wanted to share all that and say how grateful I am that you all are sticking with it and still with us and still being an audience for jazz. I mean, that's essentially what this was all about. So as soon as I can get my bearings here, I will figure it out.
And
There we go. Hello.
There you are. The real Joe. The real Mooche.
So howdy, the real me.
We just want to welcome everyone back again to season 3. Joe and Carmen, I know you were both going to tell us a little bit about what we at Jazz Arts Project has been up to over this past summer, since we did have the season off from our Zoom show here, and also what we can expect to see in the season 3. You're going to be changing it up a little bit, and for those of you who are return attendees here, Joe has something exciting planned for this season, and I will tell you a little bit about it. But first, update everyone. What has Jazz Arts Project been up to for the whole summer?
Well, Joe, you want to tell them about
Sure,
Jazz on the Plaza? All the,
many of
Joe
you.
is. First of all, we have to say that Joe knows everybody. So maybe you, Mooche. I got to start calling you Mooche tonight. So I'm just calling you Mooche.
Yeah.
But Mooche knows all the jazz artists, and so Mooche spent the summer coordinating some wonderful, wonderful concerts for us. And I want to mention, I want to mention the first artist that we had at Jazz on the Plaza. People were enamored with her, and I want to get her name correct. Give me 1 second because I have it written down here. She was fabulous. I had never heard her before. This was my first time listening to her.
Talking about Sharni?
Pardon me?
Sharni Wade?
Yes, Sharni Wade.
Yeah.
She was the first one we had because the first week got rained out, but the second week, many people had not heard of her, and this was our first concert that we were out in public. We were outdoors. I want to say Two River Theater has a gazebo now, and they have a little space outside where we can set up chairs and things. And so they had pods kind of set up for people to sit in so that we were safe and distant. And we kind of, wore masks if need be, but we had a lot of space outside. And so as people would go into the building and walk past me, I would get thumbs up from some of our audience members. I had one woman stop me and say, "Thank you so much. I've never heard of Sharni, but she is incredible." And so the reviews were stellar from those who knew her to those who didn't. So I was just curious about Sharni Wade because she kicked it off right for us.
It's interesting. With all the, I don't know if you guys can tell, but we are so out of practice doing these Mondays with Mooche scenes. I spent like a half hour trying to figure out, what's going on with my microphone and my camera and this and that, and we had all these weirdnesses going on. We're out of practice of this stuff. And when we started this summer producing live events again, it was the same kind of thing. Most of it came back to us, but I got to tell you, it was a wild ride, just figuring out what the heck to do. Now, after a couple of years, we have to do live events. How do you do that? Oh my word, So it was interesting. But thank you to those of you who came to those events and made it enjoyable. Also to a lot of you who supported us and allowed us to actually continue and do. There was no box office per se. It was very difficult. it would have been very difficult to fund these things that we did all summer if it wasn't for some generous donors, and some of them are among you now. Thank you. And some corporate grants as well, and some quite actually some government grants as well that we managed to get through some relief funds. And we're going to start producing some more things on that same level. But just know that it's it's not easy to get back into the swing of things, even though we never stopped working. Everything's different. It's weird.
Yeah. Joe, tell everyone about, you mentioned some of the public concerts that we had this summer in Red Bank, New Jersey, for those of you who are here visiting us tonight from out of state or out of the area. But tell us about the education programs that also happened this summer. What Jazz Arts Project really is all about.
Yeah. The model that we started this organization back 15 years now, 16, I lose track, was that we were interested in producing world-class music and presenting it to this region, and using those productions by selling tickets and getting sponsors and getting donations to fund our educational programs for area youth. So, we run 2 different education programs currently. One is basically a high school program called the Jazz Arts Academy, and that runs year-round. There's high school age kids from all over the area, and we have great jazz musicians leading it and teaching the classes. And we also have a middle school summer camp. We actually did an in-person summer camp this past summer at the Red Bank Middle School. 70 some odd kids showed up.
Wow.
Yeah.
70?
And
70 kids.
72, I think it was.
And is there a cost for those kids to attend the summer camp?
No, it's absolutely free. In fact, we provide them with instruments and instructions. I think there were 8 teachers on hand. And we had really dedicated and pinpoint instruction. By the end of that 2 weeks, they were playing a concert, and they sounded good.
Wow. I didn't know you had 72 kids. No wonder
yeah.
I didn't hear from you for 6 weeks in the summer.
It ain't easy.
I don't think you've ever had that many kids in the program before.
It was close, but it ain't easy.
Ooh.
Joe, who were the instructors?
Well, Zach Lorelli, who's our education coordinator now for the organization, was one of the principal instructors. Don Swinkowski. Well, you're putting him on the spot. He's over at the Red Bank High School now. I can't remember his name.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, really. It's my brain is going somewhere else. Anyway, they're top-notch teachers and musicians in their own right, every one of them. And Lucy Chen was part of it also. There was a piano and strings department. Jeffrey Boga, by the way, was one of the violin teachers, and a winds and brass department. So we actually had 2 different sort of wings of the program, and we put them all together to play all together. We wrote some stuff that they could do together. When you're starting out on an instrument, it's not easy to learn enough to actually play a piece of music together at the same time in the same room. and make it sound like anything. But these kids, they, it's interesting. What I've learned over the years from doing these programs, these young kids just soak up everything you want to give them. You throw it at them, they'll soak it up, and they'll take it further than you ever thought they would. So it was a really interesting
These
process.
were rank amateur kids that you had on the in the program who had never played before.
Some of them, most of them, in fact, never played an instrument before.
Uh-huh.
We had two different levels. We had a beginning class, band one, we called it, and we had an intermediate class. And it was all only middle school for that program. So yeah, some of them, we were giving them instruments, and of course, most of them would choose drums. So we'd kind of have to steer some away from drums and into saxophones or trumpets or something.
Smart kids. They're smart kids.
There, as from a drummer, yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So I want us, we're going to have this whole show is dedicated to Ask Mooche Anything. And one thing that I want to let people know is that we can ask about Mooche, but we can also ask about jazz. We can ask about
the program,
cooking, anything of interest. I mean, Mooche is ready
What's
to
your
take on
favorite
anything.
cocktail?
But I was
Joe?
wondering,
Yeah.
if it'll be okay if I started out with a question that we got submitted by Lisa Lorelli, because she asked a good question, and I think it'll be a good way to kind of segue into the larger conversation. So can I kick it off with that question?
Sure, but I can answer my favorite cocktail first.
You want to start with your cocktail? Do you have one with you?
In fact,
right
I have one. I have one with me at the moment. It's a Jack Daniel's honey on the rocks.
Okay.
That's it.
And you're just sipping it slowly, right?
Sipping slowly.
Very good.
So
You're not
gonna
right.
read
If this lasts
question.
long enough, you'll get some really weird answers from me, I'm sure.
I'm going to read Lisa's question, and then Lisa's also here. And if you want to join the conversation, please feel free. And we should also let everyone know that Lisa is Zach's mom, our
right.
education instructor. So she's a proud parent and has a great connection to jazz. And so we'd like to hear about your relationship to jazz too, and that'd be great. So Lisa's question is to you, Joe. I'd love to know about how you got into jazz in the first place and what various ways you were involved in the jazz scene and community over the years. I want to kick it off with that question. I think it's a nice.
Okay, well, let's see. When I was in high school, a budding trumpet player, I guess you could say, I had a band director who was a top professional trumpet player and who had actually been on the road with like Tommy Dorsey and Frankie Carl band and various things. And he was just a marvelous person and teacher, in fact. So he really guided my music education for quite a while and got me into Manhattan School of Music. But through high school, I was really a classical trumpet player and played mostly that, although we did have a big band in the high school as well, although we called it a stage band back then. But what you would refer to today as a big band. Played in that and went to Manhattan School of Music as a classical trumpet player. While I was there, this was even before Manhattan had a jazz program per se. There was just a couple of courses that I took and met some other amazing jazz players that turned me on to jazz little by little. And when I got out of school, I became well, first of all, I went to Mexico as a orchestral symphonic trumpet player. I was in an orchestra in Mexico for a while. Orquesta Sinfónica del Estado de Mexico. I was assistant principal trumpet player there. When I got back to New York, I was a freelance player. And as a freelance musician, you really have to be able to do everything. So I sort of got more and more involved in jazz. And that kind of evolved into conducting and producing. And most of that was on the jazz side rather than the classical side. So I sort of, kept going into jazz. further and further, delving into it and learning about it and conducting it and producing it. And when I lived in, when I moved to Red Bank, as a matter of fact, or this area, I looked around and I thought, it's kind of a shame that every time I go to work, I have to get on a plane. I was traveling at that time all over the world as a guest conductor for jazz orchestras and various artists and various entertainers as a music director. And I noticed there wasn't a lot happening here. So I opened my big mouth and decided maybe we need an organization around here to promote some good music. And I thought it would be so easy. We'd just put on concerts and everybody would come and everything would be hunky-dory. And here we are 15 years later, and we're basically, we're struggling to do it all. I know that's a long-winded answer, but that's the best I got.
Well, I want to pull something out because you truncate, you put a lot in there. But so
Yeah.
are you saying that you were you studied classical throughout your education training until you left school?
That's pretty much true, yeah.
So you didn't study jazz. Were you in relationship to jazz, at least as a listener?
Oh yeah, as not only as a listener but also as a player. Sort of, I was a classical trumpet player who also played jazz.
Okay.
It was that kind of thing. And I evolved more and more as I got out.
Was there you don't do classical as much? I haven't heard you do much classical. Or do you still have a relationship with classical music?
I have, yeah, sure.
Okay. Why jazz? What distinguished jazz though? That became your focus, your career. Was it just because of work? I think there's more to it.
As a trumpet player, when I was a kid, like it must have been in middle school or something, my sister brought home an album that she bought like for 50 cents at a garage sale or something. And it turns out it was the Miles Davis Porgy and Bess album, which, if you know the album, it's very orchestral in its and jazz. So
wrote the arrangements.
Gil Evans wrote the arrangements, of course.
Yeah.
And it's very orchestral and very, I don't even know how to describe it, but it bridges that gap between jazz and classical music, right? If you call it classical music. And that really struck me as something really important and really compelling to me, right? So although I went to the jazz route, I guess that always stuck in my mind as, there's a connection to all of this, and maybe and I think since then in my career, that's pretty much what I've been trying to do, because I've gone around the world conducting orchestras and presenting jazz pieces to orchestras, to orchestra concerts.
So Lisa, did that answer your question?
I hope so.
You can turn your microphone on.
Yeah, don't be shy. Everybody can speak.
Yes.
I do think that's a great start. I really appreciate it. And you said it was long-winded. I was like, yeah, you could take each one of those things and each step and just expand on it. I'm so very interested in the stories you have to tell, Joe.
Wow. Thank you. You're the one.
Joe, I think we all have questions for you. You're being a little shy and reserved tonight. Tell us, continuing your background, so when I met you, you introduced yourself as a conductor, or that's what I discovered. I had to dig to find information about you, because I'm like, who is this guy, and how do all these famous jazz artists know him and love him? You're a little bit too humble, I find, and I wasn't able to find out anything about you. And I think I'm going to learn some new things about you tonight. How did you become a conductor? You went from being a jazz musician to that. I mean, that's a significant role change and jump. What is the story? Tell us the dirt.
I refer to myself these days as a recovering trumpet player. So, as a trumpet player, I was a freelance player, and I started conducting. It's one of those things where somebody says, we need a conductor for this, can you do it? I said, sure, I'll do it. And then I had to figure out what the hell to do, right? And so it turns out I happen to be good at it, and I realized that the fact that I was a musician in orchestras, and I actually played under some of the best conductors in the world, I got like that experience from the other side of it, right? I didn't come to conducting from nowhere or from being a piano player, a concert artist or something. I was actually sitting in the orchestra underneath conductors and watching them and trying to figure out how they produce their work. So I kind of fell into conducting, and I realized pretty soon that being in front of the orchestra pays a lot more than sitting in the middle of the orchestra. So I started trying to do more in front of the orchestra than behind it. Simple as that.
Got it. And how did you, once you started doing that, how did you build your career? I mean, because being a maestro, a conductor is quite and before you answer, if I could just share a little plug. I learned of a show on Netflix a couple of years ago. Some of you may have seen it or have heard of it, but I started watching the show, and I swear I didn't leave my couch for 3 days. I was addicted to this. It's called Mozart in the Jungle. And it's a show, it's a drama about a conductor, about a maestro. And I really didn't have an appreciation because I didn't understand what exactly a conductor of a big band does until I watched that show. And let me tell you, I know very little about jazz, believe it or not, but I was addicted to this show. And Joe, after watching that in a 3 days straight, I had so much more respect for you because, I mean, it's unbelievable what you do, the ear that you have to have, and the forward thinking to conduct the egos and the music. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So how did you make that, how did you grow as a conductor? Not everyone could do it, first of all.
Yeah. I think, like I said, from sitting inside the orchestra watching the best conductors, but also watching the worst conductors, and figuring out what not to do. My wife traveled with me. She picked the best locations, right? She didn't want to go to Sweden in the wintertime when I had to conduct in Sweden. She wasn't into that one. But she went to England with me, and she went to Australia with me to conduct the Adelaide Symphony. And she describes watching the rehearsal as sort of like making sausage, It's like I'm taking all this weird stuff from each of the sections of the orchestra and kind of knitting it together to produce like a cohesive thing that's what I want it to sound like, right? And quite honestly, most of the conductor's work is done in rehearsal. You're putting the piece together and getting the musicians to respond to you based on what you want the music to sound like, right? In the performance, it's basically you're there to remind them what you did during rehearsal, right? And some conductors, put on a show for the audience, right? You wiggle your tush a little bit, and you wiggle your arms, and that makes. I never really got to that level, I was never like a name conductor, but I was kind of a journeyman, and got the job done. So I got called. And quite honestly, I never really tried to do it. I guess I was fairly good at it, and I started getting called for things that I was good at. Right? I never advertised for it. I never made calls to do it. I just basically answered the phone.
Where were some of the places that you conducted? Some big halls, or that we would know, venues.
Birmingham, England, Birmingham Symphony, the BBC. I did several things at the BBC that was broadcast on the BBC.
Wow.
All over London. Sweden, Göteborg, Sweden. We did a whole series of things there. Australia, the Adelaide Symphony. I was crazy. I spent like 2 weeks in Adelaide. Takes almost 2 weeks to get there. I mean, it's ridiculous plane ride. Wuppertal, Germany. Canada, all over the United States.
Wow.
I have some traveling under my belt.
So that kind of leads me to another question we have from Fire. I think this is from Fire. We have a Sonia question. We have
Putting my feet to the fire.
Oh, Carmen, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
The question is, what years did you perform in the UK, and how would you compare the audiences in London or Birmingham as opposed to those here in the US?
Years. I have no idea the years. It was I haven't been there at least in 5 or 6 years anywhere in Europe, to tell you the truth. But the audiences it's an interesting point. The audience in Europe is much more educated to this music. And if they're not, they seem to become so before they go to the concert. I had people would come up to me after a concert in backstage and say, I heard what you did on the such and such a movement, and I was comparing it to when so-and-so on the so-and-so recording, and, was that the influence, or is that, they would have studied the music that they were about to hear before coming to the concert. And I thought, boy, that would never happen in the United States. Or maybe it does, but it's not the norm, So, it's one of the things I really discovered is that the cultural education is so much more complete in Europe. And I was, it was a real revelation to me, and perhaps it, I don't know, explains a lot, I guess. I'm not sure.
And you may or may not know this, but is funding sometimes in those places from the government seems to be a lot stronger in terms of reinforcing that importance of culture to the community, whereas we sometimes in America seem to struggle with that.
I played with, conducted several tours with something called the Bohuslän Big Band. And the Bohuslän Big Band was it's in Sweden. It was totally supported by government funds. And these guys have a full-time job playing big band music. And they bring in guest conductors and guest artists and stuff all the time from the States, but also from elsewhere. But they had their own building. It was a rehearsal hall. It had practice rooms around the side. It had all the equipment they needed. It had a truck. And I guess they would rent buses when they went on tour. But it was a outgrowth of a military band, as a matter of fact, from years ago, they told me. And it was the wasteland big band was totally government supported, and I thought, you know, why isn't that here? You know, just symphony orchestras are struggling to make ends meet these days, and the, you know, you lop off. Okay, I'm going to get on a soapbox here. Lop off like 1 foot of a nuclear submarine, and you could fund like every symphony orchestra in the United States. You know, so you know, I don't know why we don't do that here. You know, Sweden. The funny thing, I was in that building in Sweden, the Bohuslands band building, and somebody asked me, Americans like to take baths, yes? And I thought, baths? No. We take showers. I said, well, bath because, but I thought, I said, why? Why do you ask that? He said, everybody always asks where the bathroom is. They don't call it the bathroom in Europe. They call it the toilet. You know? Why would I ask where the bathroom is if I don't want to take a bath?
Sonia,
Anyway.
Sonia says thank you for answering her question. Do you have any more? Another question, Sonia? Do you want to say hello?
Oops. Hello. It's Sonia here.
Sonia, I'm sorry. Thank you, Sonia.
Okay. Now you just actually mentioned going to the bathroom as opposed to the toilet, because in England, you know, the bathrooms were separate from the toilet. That's
Right.
why they always say it was they were never together.
Or the loo, right?
So you call it the loo or the levee, yeah. But they were always separate. So we would always say, "I'm going to the toilet." If we want to go to the bath, we go to the bath.
Right.
So that's the difference.
So now,
But I'm
Sonia,
glad that you actually went to
Sonia-
England.
So Sonia, I'm going to ask, where are you located? Are you in Jersey, New York City?
I'm actually in Freehold.
You're Freehold. Oh wow,
Yes.
Freehold,
Where
in
are
New
you?
Jersey.
Where are you from in England?
The East End of London.
Okay. Cool.
And as you say, it's true. A lot of people in England are very educated. Even when we were younger, my father listened to a lot of the American bands and, you know, the musicians, be it classical or jazz and so forth. But he liked the big bands like the Glenn Miller and stuff like that. But they do know a lot about music because we did that in school.
Right.
And I find that also, that's more so, we tend to know more about the origins and, you know, the American jazz. And that's why, like, the Beatles, you know, knew a lot about the American guys in the 60s and the 70s, because they studied it a lot more than, say, in America.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, actually.
Thank you. It was great. It was a great question, and it's lovely to hear your voice and to see you on camera. I'm actually, I want to start saying I'm going to go to the loo now. That's going to be my.
That's
Where's the loo? Because I want to separate.
Go to the loo. Yeah, you go to the loo.
Do you know where that expression came from?
The loo?
Yeah.
Well, it was actually termed from, I mean, there are lots of little terms. I think because we used to call it also the lavatory and the levee. So it's just like a little synonym of all of them.
Okay. I always thought, for a while, whenever I heard that, I thought they were saying it was a shortened verb of the Louvre, as in the museum. No. So it's like, we're going to go to the museum, and it's a kind of a way to say a toilet.
Right. So you always will say, "I'm going to the toilet. I'm going to the loo." That was it.
There you go.
Appreciate it very much, actually. Thank you.
Great to meet you.
Thank you. I met you at the last one, actually, last summer concert in the park.
Oh, okay.
I actually came up and when the big band guys were there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that was the last one I came up and I actually spoke to you.
Sure. Well, good to see you again.
Thank you.
So, so you talked a little bit about in terms of the support that the symphony, had there, the band had there. I was curious, it kind of leads into a question, it's a little bit off, but I just want to kind of go to another question that was asked. Mm-hmm. What have been the challenges, being an organizer, producer, creator here in the United States with Jazz Arts Project and perhaps maybe in general?
Well, challenge is always funding. I mean, let's face it. Um, how do I get on this topic? Music is concert music. Let's call it concert music, which to me entails what you could refer to as classical music, as well as jazz music when it's performed in concert. And opera, for that matter, is on a different plane and a different, to me, sense than music you'd find in clubs, i.e. popular music. And at one time, jazz really came from what you could call popular music in varying places, varying cliques, or varying locales, or varying cultures. And it became more or less popular in different places until a certain point where suddenly some other kind of popular music took over, right? And there used to be a time where you could see Clark Terry or Count Basie or Duke Ellington on a TV show. They'd be a guest on the Carson show, or you guys must remember, even PBS broadcasts, right, would have those kinds of really wonderful performances to share. And today, what do we get? Yanni, or the Bee Gees, I think it was, the other night. For some reason, we don't have that sense of promoting quality, culturally significant music in our airwaves or in our main society anymore. That's my bugaboo.
So this takes me to another question. What does it feel like?
By the way, I would welcome open discussion about this. It's like I hear myself ranting and ranting and ranting. Please, give me feedback. Anybody who'd like to add into that or refute it.
America is a cultural wasteland, is the bottom line.
Gosh.
I hate to say it, but
tell us how you really feel.
The absence of jazz, the absence of even classical in the mainstream entertainment portals is obvious to everyone. And if the artists I see at the Village Vanguard, when I watch videos in Europe, they're playing in front of thousands of people. It's not just a perception; it's a reality. And I don't know what can be done to rectify it, but it's an obvious problem and issue.
Well, John, actually, I was actually going to go to your next question. I was actually going to use your question for Joe. So I think this is a good lead-in because we're talking about the cultural wasteland and the challenges. But your question was great. You asked, what does it feel like when students and young musicians you have mentored achieve academic and professional success? And I guess what I would add to that question is that when you find those young people who are interested in the music and really want to take it on and take ownership. And I want to lead that into, we have two Jazz Arts Academy students who are now at Berkeley, who got to Berkeley on full-time scholarships as being members of Jazz Arts Academy. So what does that feel like for you, Joe? Yeah, let's give a round of applause for that. That's awesome. And what does that feel like for you, Joe, to be a part of that?
It feels like that.
That's what it feels like?
I'm sorry. All right.
That's John's question.
It is interesting, John. I never thought this would happen, but I have literally been gotten emotional when I've seen certain things like that, especially when if I hear a performance by some of these kids who maybe aren't kids anymore, but from when I saw them and they were struggling to even play a scale or that, beep up, oh, beep up. When they were struggling to do that, and then to see how far they've come, sometimes it's like, it really makes me tear up. It's really significant.
Well, I want to add one thing that I've noticed, though, is that also, and this is something that I think would be great for everyone to know, is that these students, they look, I don't say look up to you, but they listen, and they really take in what you say and what you teach, and it becomes part of them. And I say that because we had Ben, who actually is one of the graduates and who actually became a board member of Jazz Arts Project at 18. I asked him to write something about his experience with jazz and with Jazz Arts Project. And Joe, can you remember the language? Because I don't. You say it all the time, but there was a phrase in there that Ben wrote, and it was part of his own essay. And Joe looked at it and goes, "Hey, wait a minute. He's saying what you said, Joe. Do you remember that?"
Yeah, I don't remember specifically what it was, though.
But is a phrase you use all the time, the cultural landscape of jazz. I'd have to pull up the
essay. Yeah.
But it was something about the cultural landscape of jazz and its importance and how we must continue this music, And Joe literally asked me, said, "Did he steal that from me?" I said, "No, Joe, this is his essay."
Yeah, he stole it from me. That's no question. Cultural landscape of the community.
Yes.
Improving the cultural landscape to the community.
Yeah. But it was almost as if he quoted Joe verbatim in this essay, and I thought that was such a funny moment. But it also showed you how he was listening and actually owning that he wants to be a part of that, and he wants to help continue that legacy of music. And he's quite stellar. He actually played this summer. He played this summer at Jazz in the Park, and did a wonderful performance. And people were very thrilled to hear this. It was his own quartet, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it's telling that any time that I've had him play with his own group or with a group of students, where we've had other people playing, other like professionals playing, I've always gotten comments from the pros that said, "Wow, this kid's got something," And the fact that he got a 4-year free ride to Berklee College of Music is just astounding,
So
it's recognized. But
Carmen, I'd like to add on that.
Yes.
As an observer, mommy, participant kind of person, because we started out with you maybe when you started, because we actually started when Dorian Parriott was at the Salvation Army in Asbury Park.
That's right.
When a certain Mr. Malcolm was a tiny person trying to hold a trombone.
And you, as I remember, were playing clarinet.
Yeah, I'm a left and a right brain with the science and the math and the music. Because you may not know it, I studied classical piano and organ.
Oh.
And clarinet and little sax over I'm only 27. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Right.
But one thing, and being a musician, because I studied classical, and I didn't have the exposure to jazz other than listening to my mother playing the records and all, because she was a singer, and then other family members and folks, and they came from the Mississippi, New Orleans end of the world. So that was my upbringing. And up here in central New Jersey, music of all kinds, concerts are almost non-existent. So you've been a breath of fresh air, but I have to say The kids latch on to you because you are not an egotistical psycho nutcase.
You don't know me very well, do you?
Oh, I remember I hung out with
Yeah,
you
I gotta
at the
say,
schools
Teresa,
and
I
at
mean,
at the summer
from a
camps and
distance.
things. But in comparison to other musicians and conductors and other folks that I've seen, you really embrace the kids, the young people. And you're not a threat. You're not abusive. Because had you been, I probably would have snatched you in the back of the hallway somewhere, punch you in the eye.
You're probably
But
right.
but that's how young people and others come into the music and embrace it, because people are taught that, oh, music's not important, you can't make any money, you can't get a real job with music, even with dance, because Malcolm is a performer.
Yeah.
And he liked the trombone, but he loves the dance even more. So you have to also encourage that, and you do that well with the little ones and the big ones. I just had to put that out there because personality of the musicians or conductors or leaders make a big difference in the role that young people want to go in.
Well, thank you very
for
much.
That comment.
You
That
know,
was wonderful.
I have to say, I've never really been a teacher per se. I did not go to college for education. I did not get a teaching degree. I've never taught in a classroom situation. I really consider myself more like a sort of a coach, maybe a mentor, an overseer. Like I want to grab really good teachers, professional teachers that I can to bring to the kids, and then I'll sort of help along the way where I can and mentor the kids, right? So because one of the first years I did this, I think it was in Asbury Park, at the Boys and Girls Club.
Mm-hmm.
We did a summer camp there, and after the first or second day, I was a wreck because I saw all these little kids, and I thought, what a big responsibility this is. These kids are in our, it's under our protection. I mean, what I could break these kids. What's going to happen if we fail in bringing a positive message, a positive impact to these kids?
Well,
right?
You have to accept go ahead. You have to accept the fact that you're a natural teacher, because I know a lot of folks with degrees and certificates that can't teach a dead dog.
Well,
you know?
Thank you, but it terrified me because I was so concerned that I would harm these kids by not knowing what the hell I'm doing teaching, and the takeaway I came out from that very first year was that every teacher, their salary of every teacher should be tripled, because it's so important and so demanding, that like you don't know until you see this firsthand.
So, Joe, we don't have too much time left, and I want to make sure that we get to everybody's questions before we end. So,
Sure.
There's one question that I want you to answer that I think you can answer real quickly, which is someone answered earlier on. How many instruments? This is from Glenn. How many instruments do you play? And I want to add on, what are they?
I am solely, well, all right, this goes to philosophy too, and perhaps my age. When I was growing up, you chose an instrument and you stuck to it and you became a master on that instrument. You didn't become a master, you play every instrument on the sun, but haphazardly. I don't think that's a good thing. And I don't think that's anything anybody should ascribe to as a musician, playing every instrument under the sun, right? They should choose their instrument or their art form or their skill and perfect that, because that's how you become a master at something, not by, I can play a little flute and I can play a little sax and I can play a little trumpet. So, I played trumpet for the better part of my life, and that's it. And like I said, I'm a recovering trumpet player now. I haven't played, so my instrument really is like the orchestra at this point. I can play a little piano because, you know, as an arranger and a composer, I can get by with piano, but I wouldn't embarrass myself in public playing piano because it's very slow and, you know, awkward. So that's my take on that.
And then the last one that we'll get to, and this, I'm going to kind of put these together, but you can add, if you want to add in a little bit about what you expect coming up for Mondays with Mooch in our upcoming quote unquote season. You know, I have to say this real quick. I have a hard time calling this seasons and TV shows because I'm like, we did not start this out to be a show. This was to help us, you know, connect and stay together as community during a very challenging time, and we're still going through that a little bit here and there, but it's interesting that we're on season 3. So, but the question that was asked, and I'm going to read it, is what changes in Jazz Arts Project and in the jazz scene in Red Bank area have you seen over the years, and what is your hope for the coming years? So that's a question, and then if you want to throw in a little bit about what we expect to do for season 3, that would be great.
Sure. Over the years that we've been an organization, I'd like to think that we've created a small but following audience. And as I said, it's always a struggle to be able to get that message out to attract more and more people into it. And, you know, jazz has a certain number of followers. There's a great little cartoon, I think it was The Simpsons, where Lisa Simpson drives by the local jazz radio station, and the big sign on the front of the radio station, Jazz Radio. It says Jazz Radio. 168 people can't be all that wrong. You know. So we have few jazz enthusiasts, and they're spread out. So it's a challenge to sort of do things that bring people together to enjoy that kind of music. So I don't know where it's going. All I know is that an organization like ours, the idea is to produce as best world-class music as we can, and hope that people will appreciate it and come to it to see it. Right? It's this music is all about America. It's about democracy. You know, it is it is not purely anymore, but it is a definitely fully American art form. And, you know, if you haven't thought about it, when you think about the, you know, free forms of expression in improvisation, for example, it corresponds to a freedom, right? And it comes from a group of people who were denied that freedom and used the music to express that which they couldn't say out front, right? So the parallel to democracy is that even though the originators of this art form were kind of held back from experience true democracy, it even goes on today, I'm sad to say. Their expression of freedom, of the sense of freedom, is so important, and it parallels democracy because the idea of improvisation is not just freedom to do anything. It's freedom to express yourself within a framework of a harmonic structure, right? So there's a tune that they're going to improvise on, there's a song, and that song has a harmonic and a form, harmonic structure and a form, and the improvisation follows that harmonic structure and form, right? So they have freedoms up to certain laws, up to a certain restrictions, just like we do in society, right? So that's why it's such a perfect parallelism, if that's a word, to democracy. That's my rant.
I'm very happy to be working and to be a part of Jazz Arts Project. I've known Joe for many years, and this has been an honor and a privilege to work with you, Jacqueline, and the people that we get to work with. The board are so wonderful and kind, and the students are incredible. Joe, thank you for those wonderful words. I'm glad it's on recording so I can go back and transcribe some of that. We're going to pull some of that out.
Are we recording? Yeah, we are.
Yes, we are. We are. So what I want to say is, first, just foremost, thank you everyone for coming. This isn't just a goodbye, but I just want to say thank everyone for coming, because I know some of you may be jumping off. But we also, at the end of our show, we do turn off the recording, and there is a bit of a after hang, a little hang afterwards. But what I want to let you know is that Mondays with Mooch is going to be happening every other week, because we are getting back to live productions and live performances, and classes are happening. And so Joe is involved in a lot of that. And so Joe can't be a one-man machine doing everything. And so what we're going to be doing now is Mondays with Mooch will be every other Monday. So the next Mondays with Mooch, and I want to make sure I got this right, Jacqueline, is November 1st. Is that correct? Monday,
No.
November 1st.
You know what? We had to change that because I'm away that week.
So Monday, November 8th.
Thank
So
you.
we're coming back Monday, November 8th. That would be the next Mondays with Mooch.
I think
we'll send
instead
it
of, let me interject. Instead of thinking in terms of every other week, let's think in terms of twice a month.
Twice a month.
Because we can juggle schedules around to fit in twice a month.
We are looking, we are in some planning stages, but we are looking to plan a live performance, hopefully fingers crossed, for the holiday season. So we're looking to get something organized for December. So that is our goal. And then we are also looking into our next year. We're starting to plan our next year. And I don't want to give anything away because it's something that we're working on, but we have this great idea for something to do for April for Jazz Appreciation Month. And if we can get this off the ground, I'm going to be so thrilled. But as I told Joe, one thing that Joe does well, Joe can pull something together by the seat of his pants in 5 minutes or less. It's ridiculous how great he can do that. And sometimes I have to say, Joe, let's pull back and let's put some time and energy to this, and let's get everybody involved so we can do this in a way that it deserves. And so if we just know that you heard it here first, I'm just dropping a little nugget, but if we get this performance pulled together for Jazz Appreciation Month, it's going to be awesome. And it will be it will be available virtually for people to attend. So it's going to be a wonderful thing as well. Go ahead, Joe.
Can I throw something in there?
Yes.
One of the things I'm thinking about doing as we continue these Mondays with Mooch is to turn it into sort of a discussion and an open kind of class about listening to music, so that maybe we can, as a group, delve into really deeply into different pieces of music and find out how we all feel about it and what it means to us and what we hear in the music, and maybe how we can sort of peel the layers of an onion away and get deeper and deeper and deeper into the core of music, and how much is involved in it. You know, it's like if you know anything about pixels, the fewer pixels you have, the more blurry something's going to be. You might still notice it's an image, but if you sharpen it by higher resolution in a picture, and you have more and more pixels, then it becomes more and more clear to you, and you see more in the picture. Music is similar to that. So I think we could dive into that and have a little sort of a course and discussion as we go about it. We can listen to some music, we can analyze it, and see where we go from there. So if that sounds like a good idea, we'll give it a shot and see what's going.
And that will still include a guest coming to share in that experience with us.
Sometimes.
So the last thing that I want to share, thank you. And also thank you for continuing to support us, supporting us monetarily, as well as also coming to be with us virtually, coming out to our events. We were so happy to be back out in the world this summer. And Joe, that was a big step for Joe, because Jazz in the Park was his first outing, so we're very happy. But what I want to put up here, as I always do, is just as you always know, www.jazzartsproject.org/donate is where you can make a contribution. And also you have our contact information. If you want to get involved in other ways, as well as supporting us monetarily, but if you have other ways in which you want to support us, in terms of time, energy, volunteering, we are open to many things, and we welcome everyone to participate with us. So also share that with us. So that's my 2 cents. That's all I got for you.
I'm gonna extend just a minute or two, and I'd like to try a little experiment. I'm gonna put a link in this chat box, and it's a if you follow that link, you're gonna get asked a question. And you could enter in just a word or two, or I think it's up to 5 responses. And what's going to happen is if everybody does that, all your responses will end up merging into this like cool word salad thing, or word cloud. It might be interesting. Is anybody doing it? Is it working?
I just submitted mine.
Okay.
I just submitted mine also. I don't know if we actually see what the word cloud is. I think you get it, and then you have to maybe show us.
Share it. I can share it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you let us know if you're getting it? I see Lisa. I see you typing. I think you got it.
I see 4 or 5 responses on this so far. I'll share it when we got all of them.
Any word at all.
Any word you can.
I see you down there, Mark.
And you could do 5 different entries, I think.
We have. We have Barbara, Lisa, John, Harriet, Noel, Joe.
Oh, you know what?
Joanne,
I can watch
Laura.
this. I'm going to share the results, and apparently the results keep updating as people add.
Okay.
This is kind of cool. All right, I'm going to share. Let's see what happens. Let's see if I can share the right thing here. Maybe. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
Oh, that is cool. That's a good recap to close the night out. What a great community
introspection.
But yeah, community share on what this music and what jazz means to all of us. Thank you all for participating in our closing activity. And we will see you on November 8th for our next Mondays with Mooch.